Have you ever tried to learn something and thought you did, only to be tested, and you find that you couldn't recall the material as well as you thought you would, or as well as you thought you should? I'm Dr. Larson, and I'm going to review some of the learning techniques that have helped many students conquer material in a variety of subjects. Highly effective learning requires active engagement rather than passive review. It's a matter of consciously and intentionally analyzing the most effective part of your brain to store information rather than just listening. So you might ask, why do I need new approaches? I've been learning all my life. Think of it as being an athlete. Some people are more talented than others, but in every sport, specific training techniques can improve your game. If you're relatively intelligent, you can probably use passive learning and remember a lot. But there's a limit to everyone's capacity to remember when you learn passively. At some point, you're bound to be presented with more material than your passive approach can handle. In these situations, you need a plan. Using specific approaches simply allows you to handle more information, learn it faster, and retain it longer. We can summarize the main steps that you go through when you learn new material, whether it's conscious or not. First, you need to understand the material. This means you can classify the category into which it falls and integrate it with your current knowledge of the subject. If you don't understand something, it can never be properly memorized. Next, you need to consolidate the information. That means that you establish a specific memory of the material. The next stage is simply recognizing it when you see it again, like a multiple choice test or a photo lineup at the police station. You may not be able to draw a picture of the suspect, but you can probably recognize which of several people you've seen before. The final stage is being able to retrieve it. A foreign language is of little use if you can only read it based on recognition and not speak it, which is based on rapid retrieval. Unfortunately, much of what you learn passively is only at the level of recognition rather than retrieval. So let's start at the beginning with some examples on how you can break down this process and become more intentional in processing new data in such a way that it's not only recognized more easily, but retrieved more easily. The first step is simply to pay attention. No, you really can't do several things at once. Your brain can't process each fully. The first time you encounter new material, you need to hear it, see it, mentally visualize it, and write it down. These actions count towards the 7 repetitions on average that have been found necessary to learn a new word. Hearing it, seeing it, visualizing it, and writing it down forces your brain to process the material using several areas of the brain: auditory, visual, emotional, and motor. Writing it down also forces your brain to recreate the word by an act of retrieval from your short-term memory. Memories are not stored in one single neuron in your brain. They're actually the result of a set of neurons linked together and activated in a specific pattern and sequence. The more neurons you can link to the memory when you first hear it, the more likely it will be retrieved at a later date. So the next step is to link the information to something you already know. This can be done passively, but there are fewer links when it's passive. You can consciously think, what does that remind me of? What does that sound like, look like, belong with, associate with, or connect to? Even, what is this better than or worse than? If you consciously process the new information like this, it will have a more robust set of neurons to link that memory to. Even simple links can you remind you later of a word. For example, when trying to think of a word, go through the alphabet letter by letter. Usually, when you come to a letter that begins that word or sounds like that word, you suddenly remember it. This is because one of the several links to this memory is tucked into your language center with the symbols, that is, the letters for each sound. Consciously considering each letter leads to the word. It's easier to remember something if it has multiple links to what you already know. A good example of this is learning languages that are either very similar to your own or very different from your own. Most people consider Chinese to be more difficult than German or Dutch because English is derived from Germanic languages and they share letter combinations. So the words look like each other even if they sound different. Chinese is more difficult because, in spite of the fact that most words are shorter, they share fewer sounds with English. So each new word requires a brand new niche in your brain with fewer connections to what you already know. Here's an example. The word drugstore in Dutch is either apotheek, which is similar to apothecary, an Old English word, or drogisterij, which looks like drugstore even if it sounds different. In contrast, the Chinese word for drugstore is yuefeng, which sounds and looks nothing like the English word. After you've linked a new material to old memories, then you need to consciously differentiate it from those old memories. For example, a portal is a type of door, but refers to a distinct, large, and elaborate gate. Rouge is a type of red, but lighter, like pink or rose. Rouge is also a cosmetic. Another way to contextualize material is to not only differentiate it from other words, but to visualize the unique use or purpose of different items that may appear initially to be similar. For example, a boat can be like a ship, a tugboat, sailboat, freighter, schooner, catamaran, etc. But these words not only are different from each other, each one of them is used for something markedly different. Take your material and consider the similarities and differences in context of how you use it instead of just the words or phrases themselves. Next, establish the correct sequence of events if the new facts constitute part of a story or a theory. If you consciously place the new fact into even a simple sequence, it becomes a script similar to your other scripts. Children learn by building on scripts that sequence information. If it's a common sequence, you don't even have to think about what order it's in because it follows the expected. If it's unusual, you'll need to consciously note that, for example, this is different because the witch now plays the part of the good guy. Because a story is easier to remember, some people even suggest sequencing information in order to remember lists of unrelated items. For example, your daily trip to work passes specific landmarks that are already firmly established in your memory. At each landmark, you mentally place an item that you want to remember. You can exploit the humor or the absurdity of that juxtaposition to produce a robust mental image, for example, an elephant on top of the bank. Then, when you mentally drive through each landmark, you can retrieve the information in the order that it was stored. The more sensory inputs you use to remember any one thing, the more likely you are to remember it easily and well. So you can reinforce a memory by exploiting this. Visually, you can draw or diagram the material. Audition is used if you record the new information on a CD or cassette that you listen to while exercising, driving, shopping, etc. This has a double effect because you summarize the idea and verbalize it when you record the tape, and then recognize it when you hear it. A lot of people think that they're visual learners, but after doing this, you may discover that you actually benefit from auditory input more than you think. Rather than just reading the material over and over again, write your own textbook. This forces you to summarize the material, distilling it down to what you consider to be most important. Tables, graphs, and diagrams can shorten your work and organize your thoughts. Writing it all down uses all your senses. When, where, and how will you use this information? Do you need to store it for the future? There's an organizational technique used in law offices called a tickler file. It's intended to provide reminders of their annual responsibilities to customers. A tickler file is used to anticipate when, where, and how you'll need memories in the future. You can use it to file your memory in a real or imaginary filing system where you'll run across it later. An underutilized resource when learning new material is your limbic system. This area of the brain integrates emotion with intellect. Unless the brain perceives something as being important, it purges it. So how do you exploit this? Consciously ask yourself why the new material is important. Then exaggerate the characteristics of the information and to emphasize its importance. Did you know that visualizing playing the piano can be almost as effective as practicing the piano itself in terms of learning a new piece of music? Mental exercises in which you use material in new and different ways gives you a new perspective on the material. You have a more robust memory that's less likely to fade away. So how can you use this approach? Conduct a thought lab. Simply imagine yourself in different situations. What additional information do you need above and beyond the lecture material to navigate the imaginary situation? Look up material related to the lecture to flesh out that particular perspective. Even if the new material is not on the test, it'll make more and perhaps more interesting links to the subject, helping you learn the material that is on the test. So what are some examples of perspectives that might be used to study the effect of a new drug, for example? An anatomical perspective might force you to reconsider the distribution of the drug or its receptors. Do they overlap, or are areas of the body impermeable to the drug? Could the activation of receptors in areas of the body that are not the target organ account for particular side effects? The physiological perspective might ask how the drug influences normal body processes. What systems are impacted and why? What accounts for selectivity of action? The rest of the list is simply meant to provide new ways to consider the use of a drug and the rationale for its use or its avoidance in the clinic. Are there legal issues, surgical considerations, etc.? These perspectives can be used in thought labs, either by yourself or in study groups. A list of perspectives can usually be developed for any area of study. Whatever the topic, the goal of the thought lab is to ensure that you understand the material well enough to think clearly about it. It also reviews the material, one of 7 times needed to memorize new words, for example. It provides motivation regarding its importance and identifies when the material might be needed in the future. But the most important goal of the thought lab is not just to memorize facts, but to learn how to evaluate new information. A simple example is simply reading material or constructing sentences that use a new word in another language. Each new context reinforces the value and meaning of the new word or information. When conducted in a group, the thought lab also gives you an opportunity to teach others. You'll learn the material easily when you teach it to someone else. Teaching uses the organization that you've already imposed on the material, the verbalization of the material in the audio tapes, the tables, the graphs, and textbooks. It doesn't matter who you teach. Form a study group and teach each other. Read to your dog. Summarize each day's lectures to your spouse, your child, or a friend. Ask your teachers if you understand something correctly by summarizing it in your own words and asking them if that summary is complete and correct. No one seems to like tests. Our self-esteem is at risk. But it turns out that testing yourself is the best way to learn. The reason for this is that the test forces you to recognize material, in the case of a multiple choice test, or retrieve the material in the case of fill in the blank or essays. People often prepare for tests by reviewing material repeatedly. Instead, force yourself to retrieve the memory without looking at your notes. Like a good physical exercise, this forces the links to that material to be used and reinforces them. So to prepare for an exam, use a blank sheet of paper and completely from memory, outline the material that you need to cover. Then add as much detail to each section as you can remember. After you've exhausted your memory of the material, go back to your notes and using a different color ink, fill in the information that you still need to know but had forgotten. Finding this information and writing it down will help reinforce it and integrate it with the rest of the material. Then repeat this whole process until you can retrieve it quickly and easily. Once you've learned the material, unfortunately, consolidation of the material does not guarantee retention. Memories fade, and the old adage, use it or use it, is true. This is especially apparent when learning and using a language. So how can you enhance your retention of the material from one year to the next? It's been found that once you learn material, there's a decline in recall over the next few days to weeks. However, if you test yourself periodically, simply recognizing the material, even in a multiple choice test, has reinforcing effects and extends the memory. The act of having to retrieve the material, as on a blank sheet of paper, for example, has an even stronger positive effect and reestablishes the memory. The fact is, you're not remembering the material as much as you're reconstituting the memory by exercising the links to the subject. So it's this process of repeated reconstitution that lays down even stronger links between neurons. Remember that this all depends on initially having mastered the material at time 0. You can't reinforce a memory that was never there in the first place. In summary, what are the daily approaches to take to learn new material? Scan your lecture notes for the next day so you can anticipate what's coming. Pay attention during the lecture and summarize the lecture material in terms of similar to and different from, time sequencing, and so forth. Contextualize the material by viewing the subject from different perspectives and teach someone else whatever you've learned. Then test yourself using a blank sheet of paper to consolidate the material. Later on, test yourself again to help retain the material. Some students argue that this all takes too much time. You would have no time left to study the material. In truth, if all this is done, you won't probably need additional study time. Finally, learning is actually a form of physical training because your brain is a physical organ. Your brain needs the same care and maintenance as your muscles. So for optimal learning, get 8 hours of sleep. It's widely known to promote memory. Minimize alcohol intake because alcohol depresses memory. But drink lots of water to stay hydrated. Eat healthy food that won't cause widely fluctuating blood glucose levels, and avoid caffeine late in the day because it actually affects your sleep more than you think. And get some exercise every day. Whatever is good for your heart is also good for your brain. Try some of these ideas and see which ones work best for you. I hope they help you learn faster, easier, and better so you can relax and spend more time with your friends and family.